Please proceed, Alejandro.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. So today I'm going to speak, as the professor said, about pay for delay. Let me say that I think that this is a very important, interesting topic, especially for those of you who are here listening from the antitrust authorities. So if you want to find a little bit more about this topic, just feel free to reach me out, okay? So I have little time, so let me briefly introduce what happens in pharmaceutical markets. They are not the conventional markets as they are known, because there are the patents protecting the branded manufacturer for 20 years. So usually the originator of the drug, as we say, the branded manufacturer, has 20 years to market their drug for, as a monopolist, right? However, we see that pharmaceutical firms engage in such different strategies. I have some examples, such as evergreening, no authorized generic commitments, etc., to protect their patents or to extend their patents more than they should or they could, at least legally, okay? And the case I want to explain here is the pay for delay case, in which, to put it very simple and very straightforward, it's the branded pharmaceutical firm, the monopolist, who is paying the potential generic entrant in order to not enter the market. So what these guys do is basically they observe that generic entry is going to happen, the monopolist is seeing that generic competition will happen soon, and they go to the generic and say, look guys, do not enter the market and I will pay you. Usually, I will pay you a huge amount of money. Sometimes they involve some kind of side deals and other stuff, but usually they just pay a huge $millions in order to avoid generic entry, okay? So according to the Federal Trade Commission, this is a problem, of course, and back of the envelope calculations assume that this costs about 3.5 billion per year, which is a lot, right? But still, this is a back of the envelope calculation, and when I was reading about this and I was looking at the empirical methods we have in industrial organization, I was wondering why there is not some sort of way of precisely computing the damages consumers suffer from these agreements, because now what we have in the literature are some sort of approximations, but we are unable to compute what happens in this kind of agreements, right? So this is the idea of the research proposal I'm presenting today. And the idea is to use these empirical tools economics give us to properly quantify what happens with these agreements, okay? So I have two main research questions or two sub-questions. The first one is to do a counterfactual exercise and say, let's see what would have happened if these agreements were not being held in the market, if these agreements didn't exist. So that's the first research question I'm showing today in the proposal. And then the second one is to assess why the pharmaceutical firms are engaging in this kind of illegal agreements between them, and assess whether this is profitable for them or not. Of course, this is profitable, but we need to check it. Okay, so I'm giving some sort of novel methodology to quantify this. Now let me briefly explain the case study. So I will be using the data from Androgel, which is basically a drug to treat testosterone, well, hypogonadism, which is a problem characterized in men when we do not produce enough testosterone. We need to take this gel over here, right? So this drug was a blockbuster because it was the first treatment that allowed to create testosterone through a gel in your body. Before this drug, you needed to use the injectable vials, which are the typical things that people in the gym use to get super big. But this kind of treatment is less aggressive, so this quickly became a blockbuster drug. As in the introduction it was properly said, this also marked a very important landmark case in the federal trade, in the FTC versus Actavis case, and it ruled out that each of these cases should be evaluated under the rule of reason, right? So each of these cases should be evaluated one by one. Now, each one of these cases should be evaluated one by one, but still we don't have any tools to evaluate these cases one by one, right? So this is what I'm proposing here. Now let me show you a little bit of the story of Androgel and how I will exploit the timing. So in the 2000s, Solvay, which was the monopolist or the branded manufacturer, begins marketing Androgel, and it becomes a blockbuster drug pretty quick, right? So this attracted generic entry, and in the 2003, Actavis and other generics filed a paragraph 4 challenge in order to try to enter the market before patent expiration. I don't have time to explain this, but you can just trust me that there is a way in the United States to enter in the market before patent expiration for generics, right? So for 3 years, they were asking, were going back and forth, asking for approval from the Food and Drug Administration. And then in the 2006, what we see is that they actually received the approval to enter the market. So the interesting thing here is that these guys were ready to market their generic version of the drug. They were ready to enter the market and to start competing, let's say like this. They could have done that. But still what we observe in the status quo is that they withdraw the application from the Food and Drug Administration in the US, and they accept this pay-for-delay agreement as known later, okay? So now in the 2009, what we see is that the Federal Trade Commission sued Actavis and all the other generics and the branded manufacturer involved in this agreement for the pay-for-delay agreement. The case was remanded through 2 lower district courts until it arrived to the Supreme Court, and then in the 2013, it was ruled out that this was presumably anti-competitive, and these agreements should be evaluated one by one under the rule of reason. Okay? Then last, in the 2015, what we see in this market is that generic entry finally occurs, the monopoly finishes, and then we start seeing some competition from 2015 on. So as economists, what we see is that we have a perfect setting in which we observe the before and after period to compute the damages of this delay period, right? So in theory, from 2006, we should have observed generic competition, which theoretically should have lowered prices and then should have fostered competition, et cetera, as we learn in the micro one-on-one classes. But this doesn't happen. The monopoly stands for 9 more years than it should have. Okay, so this is the case for Androhel, and this is the case I'm studying here. Now, moving to the methods, I don't want to be very explicit here, but the idea of the proposal and the paper is to develop a structural model which allows us to create a picture of 2 worlds. Create the picture of the demand and create a picture of the supply. So the first equation we are seeing here, which might seem a bit complicated, is the usual way in which economists estimate demand, and this will allow us to perform the counterfactual that I will explain in a minute. Then from the, in the second equation, what we are seeing is the supply side. In some way, I can approximate what would have been the profits for firms in the status quo, and then in the counterfactual scenario I construct that I'm going to show now. So again, here I'm not claiming any novelty. This is the usual textbook stuff from Empirical.io, but then I think that the important stuff is here. So as I said in the beginning, what I'm trying to do here is to perform a counterfactual and ask what would have happened, remember, if this agreement is not being held, if generics have entered before into the market, right? So to do so, I take equations from before and then more equations, but I didn't want to make the presentation very heavy. I prefer this to be a bit entertaining for you. And then what I do is, since I observed generic entry in 2015, I take this MATLAB, Stata, or whatever tools, and then I take some generics that have entered from 2015, right, the first 5 generic products in the market. I keep all their characteristics fixed, and then I put all of them in markets prior to 2015, right? My data set starts in 2009. Unfortunately, I don't have data from 2006 to 2009, but still I claim that this is some sort of approximation, right? So a bit more of a technicism. What I'm doing here is basically for each market prior to 2015, I update the mean utility of each product, and then I basically, using that equation there, which is called the mean utility, usually in Empirical.io textbooks, I recompute the market structure. So what I want to show here is that, in some sense, with this methodology, I can simulate what would have been the market outcome if generics have entered before into the market to solve this, okay? So in the second step, as I said, I recompute the market shares in this market, and then I solve the system in the supply side, to see what would have been the prices, right? So in the end, after the algorithm keeps running and my computer is about to die, I can find a vector of prices and a vector of market shares that would have been in the market, that would have been the market picture if generics had entered the market. That's more or less the story I want to transmit here. So I have some preliminary results, but I didn't want to show long tables of demand and supply estimation. If you want more information, there's a poster outside in which I show the table of exactly which forms are more or less affected by this agreement. But I think the most interesting part of the paper is this graph, so let me spend a couple of minutes here explaining the results. So what we have here is, in the blue line, what we're seeing is the real price for Androgel, for the branded manufacturer, right? And the other two lines, the pink and orange lines, correspond to the branded manufacturer for the orange line and to the generic manufacturer for the pink line, in which I simulate the scenario, okay? So, as I said, I put generics before into the market and I simulate the structure. So what we're seeing here is that if generics had entered before into the market, preliminary results show that prices would have decreased a lot, especially when they start rising prices in response to generic entry, right? And in the working paper I'm doing, what I claim in some sense is that the difference between the blue line and the lower bound between these two lines is the damage that consumers suffer from this agreement. Why? Because, well, under some assumptions, we can say that that consumers would have chosen the lowest price, given the homogeneity of the market, right? But this is still preliminary results. The algorithm takes a lot to compute, but this is more or less the idea of the research proposal, right? So as it was said in the introduction, this is not an old thing that doesn't keep happening. I just put a couple of cases here that have happened both in the European Union and in the United States this year. So this just happened, right? And a key policy takeaway that I'm thinking when I'm like working on this paper is that at least in the United States, I would say that we need some more transparency when we're seeing these paragraph 4 challenges for those familiar with the US pharmaceutical market, because when a firm is abandoning the possibility of entering the market and capturing market share, especially when they have already received approval, then there might be something happening behind that, okay, could be potentially lawful, unlawful, but in some sense I think from the antitrust point of view, we need to be clear with that. We need to take care of that, okay? To conclude, basically, this particular case, show how these agreements could have lowered prices so these agreements have, in fact, increased prices for the branded manufacturer. And then I also show in the working paper that consumer surplus increases substantially, right? And just a takeaway, especially, as I said, for those working in the antitrust authorities, I think this kind of methods, we don't need to use fancy stuff to quantify what happens in the market. Here, maybe I think I overcomplicate things too much, but still quantifying demand, so estimating demand and using the standard textbook IO supply models, what we can see is have a picture of the market and also apply this methodology to other cases in which, for instance, we want to do merger simulation, but this also takes quite a lot of time to do merger simulation, right? So this methodology can be applied to. And I'm thinking also extending this to other cases, maybe foreclosure cases or stuff, in which the choice set is restricted by the nature of the market, okay? So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to any question.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you.